stand back now and take stock, I suppose the important thing is that if people feel that they're getting tight for grass, is that again, go in with supplement on time to try and slow down the speed at which you're getting through the grass that you do have. Or if you find yourself in a situation where you have no grass now, is to try and prioritize the supplementation to the groups that will give the best response. And that's why I said, depending on the stage of when you lambed and the age of the lambs or the stage of lactation of the ewe, that will be a different action depending on the farm that you're on.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you the latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. This week's episode we discuss grazing management with Dr Philip Creighton. With challenging grazing conditions around the country, we discuss the current grazing situation, open and cover the impact of delayed fertiliser application on grass regrowth. We also discuss managing supplies, targeting supplementation where supplies are tight, and grazing strategies that can be implemented. We move on to discuss fertiliser application rates, both for grazing and for silage, and Philip finishes up discussing preventive measures that should be in place at the moment for grass tetany. We hear first from Philip.
It has been challenging, Kieran, and I suppose the one saving grace, I suppose, for those of us that were lambing, is that, yes, it's been challenging, but probably if we look back to this time last year, there was continuous rain right through March. This year we did get some breaks in it and that we could get some sheep out. But yeah, it's been another challenging spring, and I suppose, it's been about maybe throwing the rule book out the window and dealing with the conditions that are in front of you as best you can. And I suppose, look, everybody's done their best from that point of view, and it's about maybe just standing back from it now and seeing where can we go next and making the best of the next couple of weeks.
Look, we're still reasonably early. There's going to be a bit of variation out there from those flocks lambing, we'll talk mid-season flocks, those lambing in the middle of February, 20th of February on, up to flocks only lambing at the moment. So, bit of variation among them. We think the majority are going to be probably mid-March. The challenge is certainly going to be a bit different, Philip, depending on which one of those systems you're in.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, as you say, if you were lambing earlier, if you were lambing mid-February, even late February, I suppose the positive was that we had a relatively mild winter. So I suppose there was a level of grass growth there, and there was reasonable covers of grass carried through on some farms. Look, I know that's going to depend on maybe how it was managed in the autumn and over the winter. But I suppose where there was a plan in place to have some ground closed up and grass having the opportunity to grow, initial covers of grass and grass availability wasn't too bad. But I suppose demand rises quickly. So if you were lambing earlier, you're probably at a point now where, grass is getting tight maybe. There's been a couple of factors at play, I suppose. Look at and very much rightly, people haven't been able to get out and spread fertiliser by and large, or very small amounts have been spread in some areas when conditions did allow. But for a lot of people, the conditions simply weren't there or weren't there up to very recently. Maybe there was a couple of spells there in more recent times, but that has put an impact in terms of regrowth. And the other thing, I suppose, that is there in terms of that's had knock-on effects in terms of regrowth. So if you were grazing, for the last month or so, grass supplies are probably quite tight. And I suppose it's the question there is, how are we going to deal with that? And in that case, ewes have probably gone past peak milk if they were lambing from mid-February onwards. And if we're talking about supplementation, we're probably targeting, supplementing the lamb at this stage now, getting more value from that supplementation by supplementing the lamb. Versus, if we were talking about ewes that have only been lambing in the last couple of weeks, we say from mid-March onwards, the challenge there is, again, maybe covers weren't able to be boosted on, no fertiliser, regrowths are poor, and I suppose we're heading into peak milk, and we don't want to do anything that's going to have a negative effect there. So it's probably a case that we would be justified in supplementing the ewes at this time there, to make sure that the peak milk is reached and maintained, and that will have a positive effect on the lamb growth rates. And then, depending on how quickly things turn around, maybe other options would have to be explored then as we move into mid to late April for lambs if grass is still tight.
we parse out some of what you've covered, but you're 100% right. I think we are hitting a key period for that ewe and lamb. We're going to get maximum growth, obviously, of the lambs at this stage, but if we don't ensure there's enough feed there for the ewes, that milk yield will reduce. That has a very big impact on lamb performance. So I think you're quite correct. If we're going to go in, we go in now. Hopefully things turn around. We can do something about it. Philip, like the fertiliser situation this year, and look, this is right across the sector. It's not just on the sheep side of it. There was little opportunity to go with it. Ground conditions were waterlogged. Very little has moved around the country. We have seen an impact of that, though, on grass growth.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose, look, that makes sense, in terms of we would normally be advising that, people get out with an early application of fertilizer to boost on the grass, the covers of grass that have been there, that have accumulated over the winter or whatever, and to increase supply as we go through the spring. This year, that hasn't been possible in a lot of cases. And, we'll use the example from Athenry here ourselves. We're no different. We got a very small amount of fertilizer out in March, on a limited area of the farm, when conditions allowed. It I suppose helped to a degree, but we definitely have seen, if I give the example, our grass growth rate this week was 15 kilos of dry matter per hectare per day. Normally, that would be heading for 25 or 30 at this point, but normally we would have had a full round of fertilizer applied probably late February, early March at the latest. And that will be kicking in and having an effect on that. So between, high rainfall levels, wet soils, probably, soil temperatures aren't too bad. Soil temperatures are reasonably normal, but you do have a lot more moisture in the soil, which tends to restrict growth a little bit. And the big one obviously being that there's less nitrogen to drive that early season growth.
When we look at pasture-based Ireland figures right across the country, we're not really seeing many crossing 20 kilos yet.
No, which is unusual.
It is. No, it has to be said it's unusual. But right, so that's been a challenge so far. I suppose if we look at the forecast for the weather coming in for the weekend, and into the first week of April, like it's not going to be too promising either to get out with fertilizer.
No, and I suppose we're not here to tell people to go spreading fertilizer, unless the conditions are right. And I suppose what we're saying is that if we stand back now and take stock, I suppose the important thing is that if people feel that they're getting tight for grass, is that again go in with supplement on time to try and slow down the speed at which you're getting through the grass that you do have. Or if you find yourself in a situation where you have no grass now, is to try and prioritize the the supplementation to the groups that will give the best response. And that's why I said, depending on the stage of when you lambed and the age of the lambs, or the stage of lactation of the ewe, that will be a different an action, a different action depending on the farm that you're on.
Yeah, look at that. Often could be just picking the group. It could be the later lambers and many flocks. Maybe them first couple of paddocks you turn out to are now grazed off, no regrowth back on them. Smaller group, maybe that's the group to target with it and keep the older group maybe moving if there is covers in front of them.
Yeah, and I suppose the one thing to remember, I suppose, is a little bit is that things will improve, and things can improve quite quickly at this time of year. If we get any sort of a settle spell. But I suppose the thing to remember is that if we have no grass left on the farm at all, and we don't give any part of the farm a chance to actually grow, we will be much longer trying to get ourselves out of trouble. So we'll be kind of chasing our tail well into April and early May. Whereas if we can take steps to just try and slow down the rotation or restrict the area a little bit in terms of that they have access to, the grass plant will respond quite quickly when conditions allow. And we should be able to get ourselves out of trouble much faster. And I suppose that would lead us on to maybe the idea of, and I know it might sound like a crazy idea when we're talking about people having limited amounts of grass and that, but even the idea of grouping up, to try and give more of the farm a chance to recover, even at slower growth rates, and also the idea of maybe putting in some of the temporary fencing to, let more area recover quicker in terms of grazing, a smaller area at a time. Now that's relative to if you're in really, really wet conditions and very heavy rain, obviously, confining them to a smaller area is not going to work, and that's not what we're recommending. But if conditions are are okay in terms of trafficability for sheep. It tends to be less of an issue. It can help to start putting up some of the temporary fencing as things do improve. Maybe not straight away, but as things start to improve, it will accelerate the speed at which we can turn things around in terms of grass availability by giving the plant more of a chance to recover as quickly as possible.
A bit of common sense. If you're going into really wet conditions and that you need sheltering fields, that's different.
Absolutely.
But your point is valid. Like if we're going to actually boost supplies, yeah, it's one way of doing it. But the other thing is you're going to spend less time grazing out that field. You're keeping a fresh pick in front of them more often. The residency period is there. That is going to have a big impact on performance.
Yeah. And I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is like, we're in early April now, but as we go through the weeks of April, anything we can do to try and maximize the growth as it does improve, will help in terms of giving us an opportunity to start closing up ground for winter feed for next year. Again, look, we're still in the winter, essentially at the moment, but we do have to keep an eye on, being able to make sufficient feed for next winter now at this stage as well. And anything we can do, again, but as you say, common sense, it's not that we're saying everything has to be followed to the letter of the law of what we would do in a normal year, but don't forget that there is steps we can take to maybe help ourselves a little bit faster than not doing it.
No, but these are all things we can have in the toolbox. If you can implement it, even if it's on just the larger fields, it's going to be an advantage. Look, you mentioned the silage. It's the one probably advantage in use. They're out. Silage intake certainly reduced a lot towards the tail end, but supplies are tight at the moment. There's a good case there. We're going to need to rebuild in the vast majority of farms. Dropping out surplus is one way we're going to achieve high quality silage on farms. I think it's going to be a challenge, Philip, this year on a lot. There's very little fertiliser maybe going out for silage cuts. So we have to bear in mind there's a lot of mixed farms that we're dealing with too.
Yeah, and look, I suppose surpluses, probably now look it's funny how things can balance out. There has been years where we've had very late springs and we've had exceptional growth in May, and we could still be looking at taking out surpluses. But this year, it is going to be slower to get the rotation back on track, which means we will be slower to maybe end up with surplus grass on the farm. But what I'm talking about really is maybe trying to plan to get ourselves on track that we could afford to drop out some ground for, that bigger planned silage cut that we don't leave ourselves tight for winter feed. If the surpluses come, brilliant. If they don't, at least we have some level of area that we can bank on, And again, as you say, to try and plan for as good a quality as we can. Look, if silage cuts are delayed because of slower growth, etc., fine. There's nothing we can do about that, but to try and target that we can still try and get a cut as early as possible, because that will have knock-on effects in terms of nutrition and the costs of feeding the ewes next year as well. So I suppose the key thing with the fertilizer message, is yes, for a lot of people, conditions are still not appropriate there, but I suppose at least maybe, having fertilizer in the yard ready that, if conditions do improve, if there's a window emerges, or whether that's having your name on a list if it's a contractor or a merchant doing it for you or whatever, having some bit of planning in place for that there. And I suppose look at if we're talking about application rates, in cases where nothing has gone out, there is talk of maybe putting higher levels of fertilizer out. To me, it's about the plant will only use so much fertilizer, at a time, or only has the capacity. So it's still, for lower stock farms, you're probably talking somewhere 20 to 25 kilos of nitrogen per hectare as the upper limit of your application. For higher stock farms, maybe you're up on 30, 35, but that's up at the very higher end of it. If you have some out, then obviously you're back down to your, maybe 20 kilos per hectare up to a max of 30. For your grazing ground, for your silage ground, look, it will all depend on, as conditions improve, when do they improve, and then targeting when do you want to cut. So, it may be a case that we're going to have to adjust rates to suit, do we go with a slightly lower amount, still targeting to have some high quality silage cut, by the end of May or early June. And, that will be dictated, how much goes out will be dictated about when you have the opportunity to close and when you get the opportunity to spread. And maybe, plan to take an extra, second cut or whatever to maybe boost supplies, or do we go out with the standard amount and just accept that we will have the quantity but a lower quality? And I think there's probably merit to looking this year at maybe at least having some proportion that is still kept targeted at an earlier cut to keep an amount of high quality feed there that can be used strategically. And then if we do leave some ground to go on slightly longer, maybe it is closed up later this year, but to bulk up that little bit more, it can be used maybe earlier on or to lower priority stock. But we still have some high quality feed in the yard as well come next winter.
When we're speaking about feeding condition on ewes, I'll go back to where you start with this. Like the key priority, Philip, at the moment, keep enough grass in front of that flock, try and prioritise graze as much, supplement if needed. I suppose like there is other risks still, like tetany and that, and this, whether like the demands on the ewe at the moment are quite large.
Yeah, and I suppose that the challenging conditions we've had, ewes are going to be under stress. And I suppose for those, again, for the March lambing flocks, we're coming towards peak milk for a lot of those flocks, and we're probably coming towards peak tetany risk in terms of if ewes are under pressure and given the weather conditions, cold, wet, windy conditions, where they could be under stress, that is a significant trigger for tetany. So again, even regardless of grass availability, maybe looking at the forecast there, and when they're forecasting the really bad days rain or nights rain or whatever, maybe a little bit of supplement there with CalMag in it or whatever to get a bit of magnesium into them to try and keep that at bay is a positive step there to take as well.
Yeah, certainly having them preventive measures in place. We're not out of that risk period yet.
No, and this is real the high risk now the next week or so.
Look, I think maybe just to summarise, conditions are difficult. They're difficult right across the country. No individual farmers, don't anyone experiencing it. But maybe putting some of the measures in place, keeping an eye on it, and hopefully if conditions improve, we can start to turn things around a wee bit again.
Exactly.
Good having you on. We'll chat to you again in the coming weeks.
Thanks, Kieran.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. Philip has highlighted some key areas to focus on in terms of management, and look, our conditions can change very quickly this time of the year, so hopefully we see a better spell coming. That's it for me for this episode. For updates on the sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more episodes.